Alien terror researchers study humans because we transform nightmares into morning fuel. Part 1. Doctor stared at the data streaming across his display screens and felt his three hearts sink with dread. Something was very wrong with the human readings. In his 40 years of studying fear responses across the galaxy, he had never seen anything like this. Every species experienced terror in predictable ways. Fear meant freeze, flee, or fight. Fear meant stress hormones flooding the system. Fear meant psychological damage that required time and treatment to heal. The data from human ships and colonies should have followed these same universal patterns. It did not. His office at the Galactic Institute for Cognitive Sciences was cluttered with decades of research. Holographic displays floated above every surface, each one showing comparative brain scans from different species. Though with their crystalline neural structures, showed fear as sharp, jagged spikes of activity that took days to smooth out. The people, gentle herbivores from a peaceful moon, sometimes died from fear responses alone when confronted with predators. Even the warlike, who bred soldiers in artificial wombs, showed permanent psychological scarring from extreme terror events. But humans, the data made no sense. Pulled up the latest incident report. A human mining ship called the Steady Hand had responded to a distress beacon 3 weeks ago. They found a derelict vessel drifting in dead space. The ship's logs told a horror story. The crew had gone mad over the course of 6 months, driven insane by something they encountered in an uncharted system. The logs devolved from professional reports into gibberish and screaming. When the human miners boarded the derelict, they found evidence of violence, strange symbols carved into the walls, and the scattered remains of the crew. The monitoring station in that sector had recorded the human miners during their time on the derelict ship. Their fear responses were completely normal, heart rates through the ceiling, stress hormones flooding their systems, neural patterns showing genuine, overwhelming terror. 3 of the 5 crew members vomited from fear. 1 woman was crying. The ship's captain was shaking so badly he could barely hold his equipment. That part made sense too. That was how fear worked. What happened next did not make sense. The human miners returned to their ship, sealed the airlock, and reported the derelict as a hazard for quarantine. They ate dinner. They slept for 8 hours. When they woke up the next morning, they showed they were completely fine. Not just functional, but genuinely fine. The monitoring station's AI had flagged this as impossible and sent it up the chain for review. A species didn't just bounce back from that level of psychological trauma overnight. Had access to the ship's internal communications. He played the audio from the morning after their terrifying discovery. The captain was making jokes about how badly he had shaken. The woman who had been crying was laughing about it. They were discussing what the derelict crew might have encountered, turning it into an intellectual puzzle instead of a source of ongoing fear. One miner said, "At least we know to avoid that system. Good intel for the price of a bad night's sleep." A bad night's sleep, that's what they called it. Brought his concerns to Doctor, a colleague who specialized in comparative neurology. Her crystalline body refracting the light in his office into rainbow patterns. She listened to his findings with growing interest, her internal glow pulsing faster as she processed the information. "You think this is a measurement error?" she asked, her voice like wind chimes. "I thought so at first," admitted, "but I've found 16 similar incidents over the past year. Humans encounter something terrifying. They respond with appropriate fear. Then they sleep and the next day they're functional again. Sometimes they're more than functional. They're motivated." Glow dimmed, which meant she was thinking hard. "Show me the sleep data." Pulled up the neural scans from the human miners during their sleep cycles. The patterns were bizarre. Instead of the fear memories being suppressed or avoided, they were being actively processed. Human brains during sleep showed intense activity in memory centers, emotional processing regions, and problem-solving areas all at the same time. It looked like their brains were running simulations, testing scenarios, extracting information from the fear experience. "This is active learning," said quietly. "They're not trying to forget the fear, they're trying to understand it." "That should cause more trauma, not less," argued. "Reliving fear events typically reinforces the psychological damage." "For every other species, yes." Glow brightened with excitement. "But what if humans evolved differently? What if their sleep cycle is designed to metabolize fear experiences?" The idea seemed impossible but couldn't ignore the data. He spent the next week digging through every record he could access. Human colony reports, military after-action reports, emergency response logs. The pattern held across every dataset. Humans experienced fear normally, but they processed it abnormally. Terror that should have left them with lasting trauma seemed to convert overnight into determination, caution, or even motivation. He found a particularly striking example from a human research station on a hostile world. A massive predator had broken through their perimeter fence and killed 2 people before being driven off. The station's psychological officer had filed detailed reports on the survivors. The night after the attack, nearly everyone had nightmares. The station's medical AI recorded their sleep data showing high stress even during rest. But the morning reports showed something unexpected. The survivors weren't paralyzed by their fear. They were angry. They were planning. Within 48 hours of the attack, they had completely redesigned their perimeter defenses, established new patrol patterns, and started training programs for predator encounters. The psychological officer's final note said, "Subjects have transformed traumatic event into actionable improvements. Recommend continued observation but no intervention needed." No intervention needed, after 2 people died horribly. Brought his expanded findings to the Institute's review board. He presented 17 separate incidents where humans had encountered situations that should have caused lasting psychological damage. In every case, the humans bounced back within a day or 2. The board members listened with expressions ranging from skepticism to concern. "You're suggesting humans have evolved immunity to psychological trauma?" asked Doctor, an elderly scholar from a species that looked like ambulatory moss. "Not immunity," corrected, "but they process it differently. They seem to extract information from fear and convert it into forward action." "That's adaptive," added, "perhaps extremely adaptive. Think about what that would mean for a species' survival." The board discussed it for an hour. Finally, Doctor spoke for the group. "This is too important to dismiss, but too extraordinary to accept without rigorous proof. Doctor, you're authorized to establish a proper research study. Pick a human population we can observe closely. Document everything. We need to understand if this is real and if so, how it works." Felt a mixture of excitement and guilt. Excitement because he was being given resources to solve this mystery. Guilt because proper observation would mean watching humans experience fear without intervening. But the data suggested humans would be fine afterward, better than fine even. He had to know the truth. He spent 2 weeks analyzing potential research sites. They needed a location where humans regularly faced genuine challenges and dangers, but where the researchers could observe without being detected. They finally selected Research Station Perseus, a small human outpost on the edge of explored space. The station studied exotic particles near a neutron star and faced regular equipment failures, radiation surges, and the general hazards of deep space operation. 42 humans lived and worked there, far from help if something went wrong. It was perfect for their purposes. And took a small research vessel and set up a hidden observation post in a nearby asteroid field. Their equipment could monitor the station's communications, scan from a distance, and even tap into the station's internal sensor networks without being detected. They had visual feeds from multiple angles. They had full access to personnel files and psychological profiles. Calibrated the neural scanners while reviewed the crew roster. Scientists, engineers, maintenance workers, all the standard roles. He noted that several crew members were on their second or third deep space assignment. They had volunteered to work in isolation, far from civilization, surrounded by radiation and vacuum. That took a certain kind of courage or perhaps a certain kind of psychology. Reddy asked. Activated the recording systems. Let's see what makes humans different. Part 2. The first week of observation was almost boring. The humans on Research Station Perseus followed their routines with practiced efficiency. They worked 12-hour shifts, ate meals together in their small cafeteria, exercised in the station's tiny gym, and slept in individual quarters barely larger than storage closets, and recorded everything, building a baseline of normal human behavior. Then the accident started. Hadn't planned to cause problems so soon, but an opportunity presented itself. The station's main power coupling developed a small crack. It wasn't dangerous yet, but realized he could make it worse with a precisely calibrated energy pulse from his ship. The crack would spread faster, causing a minor crisis without real danger. He looked at, who dimmed her glow, and what he had learned was her species' equivalent of a worried frown. "Are we really doing this?" she asked. "The crack already exists," reasoned. "We're just accelerating a problem that would happen anyway, and we can step in if things get truly dangerous." He sent the pulse. 3 hours later, alarms blared throughout the human station. The power coupling was failing faster than expected. The chief engineer, a woman named Sarah, ran diagnostics while shouting orders to her team. The station's lights flickered. Life support dropped to backup systems. The crew had maybe 6 hours to fix the problem before things became critical. Watched their spike, heart rates elevated. Stress hormones flooded their systems. This was normal fear, appropriate fear, the kind of fear that meant this could kill you if you don't fix it. Sarah's hands were shaking as she pulled up schematics. Another engineer was breathing too fast, on the edge of panic. "I've got it," Sarah said, forcing calm into her voice. "I need you to shut down the secondary grid. Tom, get the replacement coupling from storage. We can do this." They did it. The repairs took 5 hours of dangerous work with fluctuating power and failing safety systems. Twice, someone almost made a mistake that could have caused an explosion. But the humans pushed through their fear, completed the repairs, and restored the station to normal operations. When it was over, Sarah sat down on the deck and put her head in her hands. She was shaking. "I thought we were dead," said quietly. "We weren't though," Tom replied. "We fixed it, beer later." "Absolutely." Monitored them through the night. All 3 engineers showed elevated stress during their sleep cycles. Sarah's neural patterns showed she was having nightmares, reliving the moment when the power coupling almost exploded in her hands. Tossed and turned, his body tense even in sleep. But their brain activity was fascinating. Even in their nightmares, their minds were working through the problem. Sarah's sleeping brain ran through the repair sequence 17 different ways, testing variables, learning from the experience. Dreamed about the warning signs they had missed before the crisis, cataloging information for future reference. When morning came, the transformation was remarkable. Sarah woke up, went to the cafeteria, and poured herself coffee. She looked tired but not traumatized. Joined her, and they started discussing improvements to the monitoring systems. Within an hour, they had written up a proposal for better early warning protocols. They turned their near-death experience into a training scenario for new crew members. "Did you see how close we were to losing it?" said, almost excited. "We should document that sequence. It'll make great material for emergency response drills." Watch this with her glow pulsing rapidly. They're not trying to forget what happened. They're trying to learn from it. "And it worked," said. "Look at their stress levels now. They're back to baseline. How is that possible?" Over the next 3 weeks, and engineered 6 more crisis situations. A minor hull breach, a radiation surge, a critical system failure. Each time, the humans responded with appropriate fear. Each time, they had bad nights processing the stress. And each time, they woke up the next morning and moved forward. The fear didn't accumulate into lasting trauma. It seemed to convert into something else entirely. Started reviewing old Earth history, trying to understand how this adaptation evolved. Earth was classified as a death world by galactic standards. Hostile megafauna, extreme weather, natural disasters, disease. Humans evolved in an environment where almost everything was trying to kill them. Most species in that situation would evolve better hiding instincts or stronger flight responses. Humans evolved persistence and problem-solving. They couldn't hide from their fears, observed. Their world was too dangerous for hiding to be a long-term solution, so they evolved to face their fears instead, to learn from them. But needed more direct evidence. He decided to interview the humans directly, using the guise of a routine psychological wellness check that would seem normal to them. He created a fabricated identity as a remote counselor from the company that operated the station and sent meeting requests to several crew members. The first interview was with Sarah. She appeared on his video screen looking curious but not concerned. Using a holographic disguise to appear as a human, asked her standard questions about stress and coping mechanisms. "So that power coupling incident a few weeks ago," he said carefully, "that must have been very stressful." Sarah laughed. "Stressful, that's putting it mildly. I was convinced we were going to die, had nightmares about it for days." "And how do you feel about it now?" "Now," Sarah thought about it, "I feel good actually. We learned a lot from that situation, updated our protocols, improved our monitoring. If it happens again, we'll catch it earlier. The fear was useful information." "The fear was useful information," repeated. "That's an interesting way to phrase it." "Well, it told us what could go wrong," Sarah explained. "Fear is just your brain running worst-case scenarios, right? So you pay attention to what scares you and then you prepare for it. That's how you stay alive out here." Interviewed next, then Tom, then several others. The pattern was consistent. The humans acknowledged their fear, even joked about it, but they didn't seem burdened by it. They had processed it, learned from it, and moved on. One crew member, a security officer named Diana, put it particularly clearly. "Nightmares are practice," she said. "Your brain is running drills while you sleep. It's showing you what could happen so you're ready if it does. I used to have nightmares about equipment failures. Then when we had that power coupling crisis, I knew exactly what to do because I'd already visualized it in my dreams. Nightmares keep you sharp." Watched the interviews with increasing fascination. They've turned a psychological vulnerability into a survival tool. More than that, said, they've evolved to require it. Listen to how they talk about fear. It's not something to be avoided. It's information, it's motivation, it's training. They've weaponized their own psychological trauma. He compiled all their findings into a preliminary report for the Institute. The response was immediate and skeptical. The review board wanted more proof, harder data, a situation extreme enough that there could be no question about the human's fear response and recovery. Doctor sent a message that was blunt. Engineer a genuine crisis. Something that would traumatize any other species beyond question. If the humans still recover normally, we'll accept your conclusions. Felt sick at the suggestion, but he understood. The claims he was making were too extraordinary for half measures. He had spent days planning the scenario. It had to be genuinely dangerous but ultimately survivable. It had to generate maximum fear without causing permanent harm. And they had to be ready to intervene if anything went wrong. They chose a cascade failure. Multiple systems failing at once, creating a compound crisis with no easy solution. The humans would have to solve problems under extreme pressure with their lives clearly on the line. Made sure their ship was positioned to rescue everyone if needed, but the humans wouldn't know that. From their perspective, they would be facing death. "Are we sure about this?" asked for the 10th time. Checked his calculations again. "The data says they'll be fine, better than fine, but we have to know for certain." He initialized the sequence. Deep in Research Station Perseus, Carefully prepared malfunctions began to cascade through critical systems. The humans were about to face the worst night of their lives, and was about to learn if his theory was correct. Part 3. The crisis began at 1400 station time. A nudged from its natural trajectory by carefully calibrated tractor beam struck research station Perseus at precisely the angle needed to pierce the outer hull. Alarms screamed throughout the station. The breach was small but critical, located near the main environmental controls. Air began leaking into space at a rate that gave the crew maybe 8 hours before the atmosphere became unbreathable. Monitored the humans as they scrambled to respond. Every heart rate spiked. Adrenaline flooded their systems. This was good fear, appropriate fear, the fear that said act now or die. The station commander, a quiet man named James, took immediate control. His voice was steady despite his racing pulse. Breach in Section C7. Sarah, I need damage assessment. Diana, get everyone into suits. Start cycling atmosphere to the backup tanks. We're going to fix this. But then the cascade began. They had damaged more than just the hull. Debris had severed a critical data cable, and now the environmental controls were failing throughout the station. Life support in the residential section went offline. Temperature regulation failed. The backup systems tried to compensate, but the damage was too extensive. Watched the station's AI struggle to manage the crisis, and he felt a twist of guilt. This was worse than he had planned. Then the debris field hit. Hadn't accounted for the bringing smaller debris in its wake. Dozens of tiny impacts peppered the station's hull over the next 10 minutes. None penetrated, but they damaged external sensors and communication arrays. The station went dark to the outside universe. No communications, no calls for help. The humans were alone with their crisis. Sarah was crying as she worked to seal the main breach. Her hands were steady despite the tears streaming down her face inside her helmet, was praying under his breath, a constant whisper of please, 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 as he tried to reroute power to failing systems. Diana moved through the station checking on crew members, and could see the fear in her eyes even through the helmet faceplate. We're losing atmosphere faster than we can seal it, Sarah reported. There are too many small leaks. The whole section is compromised. Then we seal off the section, James said. Everyone to Section A, we can survive there for 48 hours if we have to. The controls are in Section C, said. If we seal it off, we can't fix anything. Then we fix it first, James replied. Sarah, how long do you need? With the damage this bad, 4 hours, maybe 5. We have 3 hours of air left. The silence that followed was heavy. Watched the spike even higher. Several crew members were on the verge of panic. Tom's breathing was so rapid he was close to hyperventilating. A young scientist named Amy was shaking so badly she couldn't work her equipment. This was fear beyond anything had subjected them to before. This was the terror of knowing you might die, that you might fail, that there might be no solution. Then we work fast, Sarah said finally. Everyone capable of helping, get to Section C. Everyone else, conserve your air and stay calm. They worked for 3 hours in conditions that would have broken most species. The temperature in the damaged section dropped to freezing. Systems failed faster than they could be repaired. Twice, someone made a mistake that cost them precious minutes. They were exhausted, terrified, running out of air. Had his hand on the rescue protocol, ready to intervene if anyone's life signs became critical. But the humans didn't give up. Sarah sealed the main breach with 2 minutes of air left in her tank, rerouted power through jury-rigged connections that would never pass safety inspection, but worked well enough to restore basic life support. Diana coordinated the team with the calm of someone who had accepted the possibility of death and decided to act anyway. When the atmospheric processors finally stabilized and started pumping fresh air, several crew members collapsed in relief. James removed his helmet in the now breathable air and sat down hard. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Status report," he managed to say. "We're alive," Sarah said. "That's the status, we're alive." The station was a mess. Systems damaged, communications down. They would need days or weeks to repair everything properly, but they had survived, watched as the humans slowly came down from the crisis. Some were crying. Others sat in silence, processing what had just happened. Tom threw up from the combination of stress and adrenaline crash. Amy was shaking so badly that Diana had to help her walk back to her quarters. "I thought we were dead," someone said. "I really thought that was it." "But it wasn't," James replied quietly. "We made it." Felt a complex mixture of relief and shame. He had pushed them to the absolute edge. Now he would see if his theory held even under these extreme conditions. The humans dispersed to their quarters. Despite the damage, despite the fear, despite everything they had just endured, most of them went to sleep. Their bodies were exhausted and their minds were overloaded. Sleep was the only option. Monitored their neural patterns throughout the night. "Look at this," she said, her glow pulsing with excitement despite the circumstances. Their fear response during the crisis was absolutely normal, textbook terror response. But now, watched the sleep data. The humans were having nightmares, every single one of them. Their sleeping brains were replaying the crisis, running through the scenarios, processing the fear. Sarah's neural patterns showed her brain examining every moment of the breach repair, testing alternative solutions, cataloging what had worked and what hadn't. Was reliving the moment when he thought the power reroute would fail, his sleeping mind working through the problem from 17 different angles. But it wasn't just problem solving. Their brains were also processing the emotional trauma, integrating the fear experience and somehow metabolizing it. Had never seen anything like it. It was as if their nightmares were a built-in psychological decontamination system, taking the raw fear and converting it into information, preparation, and motivation. When morning came, held his breath. Sarah woke up first. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long moment, then stood up and went to the cafeteria. She made coffee, joined her a few minutes later looking exhausted but not broken. Tom arrived, then Diana, then others. They gathered around the cafeteria table with their coffee and started talking. "That was the worst night of my life," Tom said flatly. "Same," agreed. "I had nightmares all night about running out of air." "Me too," Sarah said. "But you know what? The nightmares showed me 3 things we could have done better. We need to redesign the breach response protocols. And the backup systems," added. "I kept dreaming about alternative power routing. I've got some ideas." James entered the cafeteria and poured himself coffee. He looked at his crew, taking in their tired faces and determined expressions. "Status meeting in 1 hour," he said. "We're going to document everything that happened yesterday. Every mistake, every success, every near miss. Then we're going to make sure it never happens that badly again." "Coffee first, though," Sarah said. "Obviously coffee first." They were joking. Less than 12 hours after the worst crisis of their lives, after facing genuine terror and near death, they were making jokes. Watched in amazement as the humans transitioned from trauma survivors to active problem solvers. The fear hadn't paralyzed them. It had energized them. Over the next 48 hours, the crew of Research Station Perseus completely overhauled their emergency systems. They created new protocols based on what they had learned. They redesigned their breach response procedures. They implemented redundancies they had previously thought unnecessary. The crisis that should have traumatized them had instead made them more capable. Compiled the final data and sent his report to the Institute. He included every measurement, every neural scan, every piece of evidence. His conclusion was clear. Humans had evolved a unique fear processing system that allowed them to convert psychological trauma into forward action through their sleep cycles. They didn't just survive fear, they metabolized it. The response from the Institute was swift. Doctor himself called for a video conference. "This is extraordinary," the old scholar said. "We'll need to revise our entire understanding of human psychology." There's something else, added. This explains so much about human behavior that we found puzzling. Their willingness to explore dangerous territories, their persistence in the face of setbacks, their effectiveness in crisis situations. They're not fearless, they're fear processors. It's a survival adaptation, said. Earth was too dangerous for hiding to be a viable long-term strategy. Humans evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them, where the only path to survival was to face their fears, learn from them, and adapt. They turned their nightmares into preparation. The paper was published with the title Adversarial Neural Processing: How Humans Weaponize Psychological Trauma. It became one of the most cited works in. Other researchers requested permission to conduct follow-up studies. The galactic understanding of human psychology shifted fundamentally. But for the most memorable moment came at the end of his study. He decided to come clean with the crew of Research Station Perseus. He revealed his true nature, explained the research study, and apologized for the deception and danger. He expected anger, betrayal, perhaps even violence. Instead, James laughed. "You were studying us," he asked. "Why didn't you just ask? We would have helped." "We needed authentic responses," explained. "If you knew you were being observed, it might have changed your behavior." "Fair enough," Sarah said. "So what did you learn?" Told them about the research findings, about how unusual their fear processing was, about how they transformed nightmares into motivation. The humans listened with fascination, asking questions, wanting to understand themselves better. "That makes sense," Diana said finally. "Fear is just information. You use the information to stay alive." "But doesn't it bother you?" asked. "The nightmares, the trauma, the stress." Shrugged. "It bothers us in the moment, sure, but would we want to be rid of it? No, nightmares keep you sharp. They remind you what can go wrong. They help you prepare. How else would you know what you're afraid of screwing up?" Realized then that he was looking at a fundamental difference in psychology. For most species, fear was a limitation to be managed or overcome. For humans, fear was a tool to be used. They had evolved on a death world where the only path to survival was to face their nightmares, learn from them, and wake up the next morning ready to try again. Before leaving, Sarah invited the research team to join them for coffee. It was a simple gesture, a way of saying there were no hard feelings. Accepted, curious about this human ritual that seemed to follow every crisis. The coffee was bitter and he didn't understand the appeal, but he appreciated the symbolism. As they sat in the cafeteria, Tom mentioned they were planning to start an extreme sports club. Rock climbing on the nearby asteroid, spacewalking in the debris field, high-speed racing in the maintenance pods. Did and want to join. For science, of course, Tom added with a grin. Politely declined. He had learned everything he needed to know about human psychology. He had learned that humans didn't just survive nightmares. They woke up, drank coffee, and got back to work. And perhaps most terrifying to every other species in the galaxy, they actually seemed to enjoy the challenge. As his ship left the station behind, thought about the implications of his research. Humans were natural explorers, natural crisis responders, natural survivors. Not because they were fearless, but because they knew how to transform fear into fuel. The galaxy had welcomed humans as a young species, had assumed they would need protection and guidance. The galaxy, realized, had gotten it backwards. The humans would be fine. They always turned out fine. They had nightmares and then they solved the problems. It was everyone else who should perhaps be a little bit afraid.